Hey yo, welcome back to another F1 Fantasy video. And of course, this video is post Las Vegas and pre Abu Dhabi. Now, this is the final F1 Fantasy video I will be making of the year. Like I've said in multiple other videos, I will be making a review of this F1 Fantasy season and what they've done good and what they've done bad, primarily bad. But before we get into the video, let's have a look at my team from Las Vegas. Now, if you looked at my Twitter, I would have posted this, and I did go with that team. Thank God I went with that team, because I replaced Norris with Sainz. That was the best. I think that was the best thing I've done this season in F1 Fantasy. Now, I'm probably bringing back in Norris, because I think he will do better in Abu Dhabi, but gets in. Now, like I did in last week's episode, I'm going to talk about the top 5 drivers in Las Vegas. So I'm going to give my opinion on whether or not to bring them in to Abu Dhabi. Now, first off, you've got Verstappen. He is officially now 30 million in transfer value. The first driver to hit over 30 million. Congratulations to Verstappen. He will be the only one this year. 44 points. If you haven't got him in already, what are you doing? Of course, you have to have him in Abu Dhabi. He's going to make it another win there. Up next, you got Charles Leclerc. Now, if you can bring him in, I don't see a way to bring him in because he's just a bit too expensive. However, of course, he is a good driver to have. But that 23.5 million price tag is just a bit too much for me. Plus, we all know what Ferrari are like, and we all know what Leclerc's luck is sort of like. So be wary. I don't think Leclerc is a driver to bring in unless you still have a limitless this late on into the season. Then another driver back into the top 5 drivers this weekend was Oscar Piastri at 15.4 million. He's gone up a million, 39 points in Las Vegas. Well done to him. Piastri is a really good driver to have, like he's shown now. McLaren didn't have a lot of pace this weekend. He still managed to get you 39 points, and it was basically primarily from overtake bonuses. 20 points in overtake bonus. He got the fastest lap, 10 points, and positions gained 8. So he still would have got 29 points even without the fastest lap. Considering where he started, that is incredible. Now, another driver who is the second time in a row that he's been in the top 5 drivers, scoring-wise, is Lance Stroll. I kid you not. Because of Lance Stroll's amazing race in Las Vegas, this man has had 28 points in Brazil and now 39 in Las Vegas. I wouldn't bring him in because it still is Lance Stroll. But 39 points, congratulations to anyone who had Lance Stroll. 21% of you did. That is insane. You just never would have expected it from Lance Stroll, but congratulations to anyone who had him. I still wouldn't bring him in though. And then finally, another person I wouldn't bring in, but did very well last race weekend, of course, was Esteban Ocon, who managed 40 points in Las Vegas. Again, I don't see him doing it again. Brazil 17, Mexico 10. It's decent, but it's not worth that 13.5 million, considering you can get a Piastri, you could technically get a Stroll, you could get a Fernando Alonso for similar prices, so I'd go more for them. Now, in honourable mentions, I will give this to Sergio Perez. He did very well again in Las Vegas, and I'm giving it to him because he's now had 2 good races in a row. I think it is time now to bring him back into teams because he is outscoring the Ferraris and the Mercedes and the McLarens normally again, which is good to see. I will say, when I say Ferraris, Mercedes and McLarens, I mean Lando Norris, George Russell, Hamilton and Sainz. Especially Sainz, Norris and Russell, they're all his closest contenders on points, and they're the people you would think of bringing in instead of Perez. So that's just to clarify what I mean. Now, onto the top 2 constructors, and like always, you have Red Bull Racing, 29.7 million. If they have a decent race weekend, maybe they could get up to 30 million on their price tag. But 84 points, 53% of you picked them. Of course, I've got them in my team. If you don't have them in your team, this is the team that gets you the most points. Bring them in for Abu Dhabi if you still haven't. And of course, they were going to be in the top 2 constructors. And now, for someone who hasn't been in the top 2 constructors for a little bit, is Ferrari. Now, Ferrari managed 78 points in Las Vegas. Now, obviously, Sainz had a good race weekend, and that 10th place grid penalty actually helped us out fantasy-wise. Not for him, of course. And Leclerc obviously came second. What a move on the final lap to overtake Perez, and he just had a great weekend overall. He got pole position as well. And if Ferrari can keep up this form in Abu Dhabi, is it time to have a look at Ferrari as a second constructor? Because they did outperform Mercedes, McLaren and Aston by quite a bit. Well, we'll see in my team selections. And then in honourable mentions for the constructors, I have Aston Martin. Again, 13.4 million. They've gone up 0.5 million. 58% of people still have Aston Martin, which I was quite shocked by because McLaren still only have 23% percentage. And over the long run, McLaren have got you more points than Aston in the second part of the season, of course, because McLaren have gone fucking mental. But well done to Aston this weekend. They got 56 points. Second time in a row they have actually beat McLaren. So is it worth looking at Aston instead of McLaren for Abu Dhabi? I don't think so, but there is a team that you could use if you do believe so. Now for me, there are 3 teams you could choose. Again, I sort of spoke about this team, but I've made slight adjustments to this team. If you can afford it, I can, but I don't think I'll be going for them, which is the Aston Martin team. If you really think Aston Martin are going to have a good Abu Dhabi, and if I do change my mind on Aston Martin's pace, I probably will go with this team because there's no weak, well, technically there is a weak driver, but technically not as well. It's got Verstappen, Perez, Alonso, Stroll, Piastri, Red Bull and Aston Martin. Now, you got triple Aston Martin and triple Red Bull. So it's going back to the old days of F1 Fantasy at the first half of the season. Now, I don't think I'm going to be going for this team. However, I'll keep my eyes out in free practice because if Aston Martin look good, this is a great team to bring in because you don't have to worry about having a worse driver like Tsunoda or Ricciardo. And it's just more of a well-rounded team because you still get those top 2 Red Bull drivers. And if you can't afford it, drop Perez down to a Sainz or a Norris, or Piastri down to an Albon or a Gasly. Now, the second team you can have is the usual team I have been sort of running recently, which is the Verstappen, Perez, Ricciardo, Norris, Piastri with Red Bull and McLaren. Now, this team has been doing brilliantly over the long run. It's just a great team to have. Of course, if you had Tsunoda, keep Tsunoda over Ricciardo, but that money could push you up from Perez to Leclerc also if you wanted to go down to Ricciardo. And obviously you can move around with this team. If you can't afford Perez, bring in Sainz. If you can't afford Norris, drop down to an Alonso. And if you can't afford McLaren, drop down to an Aston. So there's quite a lot of variables you can use with this team. But this version of the team will do you well, and it's the team I would use unless something different happens in practice, like Aston Martin being insane or Ferrari looking 10 times better than McLaren, so then you switch out the constructor to the other team I will talk about, which is the Ferrari team. Now, of course, I would normally not bring in a constructor that is so expensive because Ferrari is 25 million, which is a lot for a constructor that isn't Red Bull. However, you can actually work around it. Now, if you can afford it, I would bring in Perez over Norris, but this is the team I could afford, which is Verstappen, Norris, Ricciardo, Stroll, Piastri with Red Bull and Ferrari. By no means a bad team. Of course, Stroll and Ricciardo are a bit of unknowns, but if Aston Martin look good, Stroll would be very good, and if McLaren look on similar pace, then Norris and Piastri would be good to bring in as well. However, I think if McLaren look good, I don't think there's a reason to bring in Ferrari because they won't score you any more points than McLaren will. So it's a bit of a weird team because for your team to do well, it also means you should have probably used the other team. But if you can afford Perez over Norris, this would be a better team. Even Sainz over Norris, I think, because then you could move a bit more into focusing on Ferrari. But anyway, those are the 3 teams I would use for Abu Dhabi. Hope you can pick one of those teams or build your team around them because they are very good options. Now, chips-wise, again, I doubt anyone's got any chips left. If you do, just use any of your chips you've got left because obviously it's the final race weekend. But yeah, let's go now have a look at my league. Now, again, thank you all so much for joining it. I'll put the link in the video right now. We are at 126 people in my league, so we've reached my target for this season of 125. So thank you all for joining it. I really appreciate it. And hey, let's end this season off with a bang, all scoring big points. Now, in my league, I'm 21st, so doing okay. I'm very happy with where I am at the minute, globally as well. But let's talk about the top 5 and give them a shout out. Now again, keeping their first place is El Shemley on 6,560 points. Well done. You've got one more hurdle to go. You do have Rivaldi and Dream Team right behind you. Only 34 points and 40 points behind you. Now, you'd probably have to have a real stinker or maybe one of those two have chips up their sleeves, but I'm not going to say nothing because I tend to jinx things, so I'm not going to say anything. Well done to Rivaldi F1 team, like I've said, in second place. Dream Team Wannabe in third. Leapers won. You have dropped to fourth on 6,485 points. Focus on keeping in that top 5, and that'll be a very good season for you. Again, for Q, keeping it in 5th with 6,471 points. Can you take Leapers 1? I'm excited to find out. But anyway, thank you all so much for watching. I hope you could take something out of this F1 Fantasy video with your team selection, chips, the best drivers to use. And hey, I'll see you all later on this week for another video. Bye-bye.